Welcome back to De'More Tax Service LLC's Let's Talk Taxes. You know we love to take deep dives into the stuff that can make or break your tax season. And today, it's all about Schedule C. It can be a little intimidating, especially if you're, just starting out with your own business or side hustle. But you guys sent in this awesome YouTube video from A Penny Pincher's Guide to Personal Finance that walks through the whole thing step by step.
It's really good. It really breaks it down with these real-life examples that just make it so much easier to understand.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right in. Who needs to file a Schedule C? I mean, it's not for everyone, right?
Exactly. It's specifically for people who are running their own businesses or side gigs, like sole proprietors. The video gives examples like driving for a ride-sharing service or renting out a property or even being a content creator. So if you're making money outside of a regular job, Schedule C is probably going to be part of your tax life.
Makes sense. So the video starts by breaking down the top section of the form. Name, social security number, business address. Pretty basic stuff, right?
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward at first. But there's this one thing that tends to trip people up. That principal, business, or profession code.
Oh, yeah, that code. I remember the video talking about that. You have to actually go to the instructions for a full list.
Yeah, you have to look it up. It's super important to get it right because it tells the IRS what kind of business you're doing.
Gotcha. We'll definitely make sure to link to those instructions in the show notes.
Okay.
So once we've got all that basic info filled out, we get to the heart of Schedule C, income and expenses.
This is where things start to get interesting. The income section is where you report all the money your business makes, your gross receipts. The video uses a simple example. $5,000 from AdSense.
Okay, so even something like ad revenue has to be reported.
Yeah.
Every dollar counts. Now let's talk about expenses. I have a feeling this is where things get a bit more complicated.
You're telling me. There are a lot of moving parts here, and you have to be careful to only deduct expenses that are really for your business. Like no sneaking in that personal vacation as a business trip.
Huh? Definitely not. But speaking of trips, what about travel and meal deductions? The video mentioned those, and I know those can be tricky.
Yeah, for sure. You got to keep really good records. If you use your car for business, you need to track your mileage. The video highlights that standard mileage deduction, 56 cents per mile. That can save you a lot of hassle if you don't want to keep track of every single gas receipt.
Right, documentation is key,
Yeah.
especially if you ever get audited.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to a deduction that's always exciting. Depreciation. The video gives an example of $2,000 worth of camera equipment.
And they talked about deducting the entire amount in the first year because of Section 179.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Section 179 can be a game changer, especially for smaller businesses. It lets you deduct a big chunk of an asset's cost up front. But like the video says, you really need to understand the rules.
Yeah, the details can be tricky. That's why it's always good to have a tax professional to help you out. And if you're looking for some expert guidance, you can always visit DeMoreTaxService.com to connect with our team. So back to Schedule C, the video also talks about this other expenses section. It's kind of like a miscellaneous category, right?
Yeah, it's for those expenses that don't really fit anywhere else. It's worth checking out because you might have some legit business expenses that don't fall under the other categories.
I like to think of it as a little treasure hunt. You never know what you might find. Speaking of potential deductions, let's talk about the home office deduction, especially now that so many people are working from home.
Yeah, but remember, it's not just about having a desk in your bedroom. The video makes it clear. It has to be a dedicated space that you use regularly and only for business.
So you can't just write off your whole apartment because you answer a few emails on the couch.
Exactly. It has to be a real home office. The video gave a simple example. A 10 by 10 room that's used only for business could lead to a $500 deduction.
Not bad. Okay, so once we've got all of our income and expenses figured out, we move on to the final calculation. Net profit or loss.
This is where it all comes together. It's basically your business's bottom line.
Now, what happens if you end up with a loss? The video briefly mentioned something about taxable losses. Sounded a bit scary, to be honest.
It can seem that way, but basically it means your expenses were more than your income for the year. There are special rules for how to deal with that on your taxes.
So it's good that the video pointed us in the right direction. We'll include links to those instructions in the show notes for sure. So we've covered a lot about income and expenses, but there's still more to Schedule C. And we'll dive into those trickier sections right after a quick word from De'More Tax Service LLC.
We'll be right back.
Looking for expert tax advice? Look no further than DeMoreTaxService.com. We can help you with all the ins and outs of Schedule C and answer all your tax-related questions. Visit us today to schedule a consultation, and let's get started.
And we're back. Ready to tackle some more Schedule C?
You bet. What's next on the list?
Let's dig into cost of goods sold.
Oh, yeah. That one sounds a little intimidating.
It can be, but the video uses this t-shirt example that makes it pretty easy to understand.
Right. Like if you're selling t-shirts, the cost of the shirts themselves, the ink and the labor to make them, that's all cost of goods sold.
Exactly. And it's not just for physical products. It applies to digital stuff and services too. Like, think about a freelance writer. The cost of their writing software could be considered cost of goods sold.
Interesting. So it's really about all the costs that go directly into making whatever it is you're selling.
Exactly. The video mentions this thing about small business taxpayers and a threshold of $26 million in revenue.
Wow, $26 million.
Yeah. But most small businesses and side hustles are going to be way below that.
That's good to know. So we don't need to get too hung up on that number. Just focus on tracking our costs accurately.
Right. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about vehicle expenses.
I bet a lot of people use their cars for business.
Probably. This section is all about how you use your vehicle for business. Total mileage, business mileage, was it available for personal use, that kind of thing.
Sounds like the IRS wants all the details.
They do, and you know what that means?
Documentation.
You got it. Keep those mileage logs, gas receipts, toll records, anything that can back up your deductions.
Speaking of documentation, we were talking about those other expenses earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things people might miss that could actually be deductible in that section?
That's a good question. You know, it really depends on the business. But some common things are professional memberships, subscriptions to industry magazines, even continuing education courses if they're related to your business.
Oh, wow. So it really is like a treasure hunt.
It can be. That's why it's so important to really look at the instructions and maybe even talk to a tax professional. They can help you find those hidden deductions and make sure you're saving as much as possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot on Schedule C: income expenses, cost of goods sold, vehicle expenses. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to those taxable losses we talked about earlier. What would you say to someone who finds themselves in that situation?
First of all, don't freak out. It doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. It just means your expenses were more than your income that year. And there are ways to handle that on your tax return.
Okay, so where do you even start if you have a taxable loss?
The first thing you should do is check out the instructions for Schedule C. There's a whole section on taxable losses. The IRS lays it all out for you, how to report it, and even how to potentially use those losses to offset income in the future.
Those instructions sound pretty important. Yeah, they're available. I'll definitely link to those in the show notes too. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into Schedule C, I want to ask you a question. Did any of this spark any ideas for you? Like any deductions you might have overlooked for your own business?
I hope so. You know, it's amazing how many deductions are out there, just waiting to be discovered. It really pays to dig into Schedule C and see what you can find.
Yeah, for sure. And even though we've covered a lot today, it's important to remember that everyone's situation is different. The instructions are super helpful. And if you're ever feeling lost or overwhelmed, you can always talk to a tax professional.
Absolutely. They can help you figure out all the specifics for your business and make sure you're doing everything right.
And speaking of expert guidance, we have a great team here at De'More Tax Service LLC who can help you with all your Schedule C needs.
You can visit DeMoreTaxService.com to connect with us. We're here to make tax season a little less stressful and help you focus on what you do best running your business.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from who needs to file Schedule C to all those tricky details. Hopefully you're feeling a little more confident about tackling this form now.
Me too.
Yeah.
The more you know about Schedule C, the better prepared you'll be.
That's the truth. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Schedule C. I hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little bit fun.
Until next time, happy filing.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Taxes podcast.